Okay, so let's dive into Trump's early actions on immigration policy. One of the first moves he made was declaring a national emergency at the southern border, right?
Right out of the gate, he wasn't messing around. This was classic Trump. Direct action. Send in troops, build in barriers, deportation flights. That's not your typical slow government response.
Exactly. In fact, the Pentagon deployed about 1,500 troops to places like El Paso and San Diego, and there was talk of sending up to 10,000 more. And the military even started using its planes and bases for deportation efforts almost immediately. That's a major operational shift.
It really set the tone, didn't it? Like, boom, this is how it's going to be. You've got operations running fast, secure the border, out with the bad guys. It's what'd you call it? A force multiplier.
Yes, that's the term. And I think what's striking here is how fast apprehension numbers actually dropped. There was a figure reported, 766 in one day, compared to the usual 10 to 12,000. I mean, that's an incredible decrease, if accurate.
It's brutal efficiency. No half measures. Look, when you've got policies like revoking that Biden rule on arrest locations, schools, churches, hospitals, there's no safe zone for sneaking around. That's enforcement, not lip service.
Sure, but it did spark fierce criticism. People said it created fear and chaos, especially among immigrant families. And then there's the question of how sustainable this level of enforcement was. But the National Emergency Declaration made it possible to secure those extra funds for the wall construction.
And that's where priorities come in. You secure the border first. Period. Everything else comes second. You've got to control the flow before you start talking about reform.
That's one perspective. But I'd argue this approach, deploying military resources to enforce immigration and make arrests, was a significant escalation compared to previous administrations. It brought up legal challenges almost immediately.
Legal this, legal that. Yeah, lawyers are gonna lawyer. No surprise there. But look at results. Look at the political impact. People, Texans especially, saw these moves and thought, this is border policy with guts, no compromises.
And that's really what shaped the political landscape after. It became not just a policy debate, but a part of Trump's identity. Promises made, promises kept. Still, you have to wonder how this aggressive stance shaped future negotiations. Now, while these policies reshaped enforcement at home, they didn't stop at the border. Trump's administration also took the fight overseas, leveraging trade agreements with countries like Colombia. He threatened tariffs to push them into taking back deported criminals and illegal migrants.
Classic Trump playbook. You hit 'em where it hurts, trade, and bam, Colombia folds. It's exactly what you want to see if you're serious about border security. No room for loopholes or excuses.
True, and it sends a message. But there's also the economic angle to consider, right? While these policies aim to protect American jobs by reducing competition from immigrant labor, they created labor shortages in sectors like agriculture and construction. Those industries heavily relied on immigrant workers.
Yeah, but you got to draw the line somewhere. Listen, you can't just open the floodgates because farmers don't have enough hands in the field. Maybe it's time to invest in automation or find ways to get Americans back to work. Short-term pain for long-term gain.
That's a fair point, but reducing legal immigration also has long-term economic consequences. Without enough people entering the workforce, you see slowdowns in growth and innovation. Skilled immigrants play a big role in filling critical gaps.
Sure, but you can't build future growth on shaky ground. First, you fix the border mess, then refine legal immigration. We're talking about priorities again. What good's innovation if you're bleeding resources on illegal crossings?
I get that, but it's a tightrope to walk. The administration argued fewer immigrants meant lower public spending on services like healthcare. Yet studies suggest immigrants contribute significantly in taxes, offsetting those costs.
The numbers might add up on paper, but down here on the ground, people don't see it that way. They see jobs lost, wages stagnating, and communities stretched thin. Forgive me if I don't buy into abstract forecasts, you know.
Well, perception does drive policy sometimes, but I'd argue that creating mechanisms for legal and regulated immigration might strike a balance between economic needs and security concerns. The question is whether the administration's approach left room for that kind of reform.
Not much room, I'd say, but that's not the point. You don't start with reform while there's chaos at the gates. You stabilize first, then rebuild. Trump played hardball, no doubt, but it put the issue in the spotlight where it long belonged.
And that hardball approach did have ripple effects internationally. Countries like Colombia were eager to comply, knowing a poor relationship with the US could hurt them economically. But domestically, was the trade-off worth it? Restricted growth? Workforce shortages? Speaking of trade-offs, let's talk about one of the most contentious, Trump's zero-tolerance policy. It sent shockwaves domestically and abroad, creating an immediate legal and social firestorm. Thousands of migrant families were separated at the border under this approach.
Yeah, but let's not sugarcoat it. That was about deterrence. It's tough, sure, but what's the alternative? Keep the same old system where anyone can game it? Look, you've got to get results, not sympathy points.
Well, public backlash was swift, Duke. Advocacy groups, rights organizations, they called it inhumane. These kinds of policies can't operate in a vacuum. When fear spreads within immigrant communities, you've got to ask, what's the long-term societal cost?
Fear, yeah. But maybe that fear ain't such a bad thing. If it stops people from making dangerous crossings, aren't we saving lives in the end? A policy's only as strong as its enforcement, right?
That's one angle, but the courts didn't agree in some cases. Look at the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA. Courts blocked Trump's attempt to end the program, calling it capricious. It sparked a whole new debate around the legality and morality of targeting so-called dreamers.
Yeah, dreamers, they're a tough one. I'll admit, you can't tug at every string without unraveling the whole system. But you gotta start somewhere to regain control. If incomplete action's the price, I say it's one worth paying.
Well, let's consider the broader implications then. This zero-tolerance strategy and the DACA limbo didn't just stay in the headlines. They affected national security discourse, community cohesion, and public trust in institutions. It became a balancing act between enforcement and empathy.
Maybe, but I'm not sure you can balance that when the foundation's cracked. The pestle analysis you love so much? It all boils down to political will at the end of the day. Secure the nation first, then stabilize the internal dynamics.
Fair enough. The political ramifications are undeniable. Trump's approach forced the country to confront hard truths about immigration policy. But the question lingers. Did these aggressive moves, separations, removals, prolonged legal fights, create a better system or just deepen the divide?
Depends on who you ask. Folks like me, we see progress, policies that actually bite instead of bark. Others, maybe they'll argue it's chaos. Either way, those policies made one thing clear. Immigration's not just a debate anymore. It's a battle line.
And maybe that's where we wrap it. Immigration turned into one of the defining issues of Trump's presidency, stirring emotions from both supporters and critics. Policies were polarizing for sure, and their legacy, well, that's still unfolding. But it's undeniable they reshaped the national conversation.
Yeah, and that's where the rubber meets the road. Love it or hate it, nobody ignored it. That's what leadership does. It makes you pay attention. And on that note, Ravi, let's punch out here. Good talk.
Agreed, Duke. That's all for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.